The generation ship Verdant Promise moved through the endless dark between galaxies like a seed drifting on an infinite wind, carrying within its metal walls the last remnants of a species that had lost its home world 300 years ago. 8-year-old Myra Chun pressed her small hands against the cold glass of the observation deck and watched the distant stars spin slowly past. Each one a sun that might have planets, each planet a place where humans might one day live again. Though she would never see that day because the journey would take many more generations to complete. Her mother had explained this to her many times, and Myra understood it the way children understand big things, which is to say she accepted it without truly feeling the weight of what it meant. The biodome sector where Myra lived with her mother was the greenest place on the ship, filled with rows of vegetables and fruit trees and flowers that served no purpose except to remind people of the world. They had left behind Dr. Sarah Chun was one of the ship's xenobotanists, which meant she studied plants from other worlds, the dead worlds they sometimes passed, the empty planets where life had once existed before some unknown disaster had swept it all away. Mira loved the biodome more than any other place on the ship because it smelled like growing things instead of recycled air, and because the soil felt cool and soft between her fingers when her mother let her help with the planting. Today was different though, because today the salvage teams had returned from their mission to the alien station, and Mira had convinced her mother to let her watch the unloading from the cargo bay observation window. The alien station had been drifting dead in space for longer than anyone could guess, its builders long extinct, its purpose unknown, and the salvage teams had spent 3 days cutting through its hull to reach whatever treasures or technologies might be hidden inside. Mira watched the suited figures carry crates and containers through the airlock, her breath fogging the glass as she pressed closer to see she was not supposed to go down to the cargo bay. Her mother had been very clear about this, but when Dr. Chun was called away to examine some biological samples, Myra found her feet carrying her toward the lift before she could think about consequences. The cargo bay was chaos and noise, adults shouting to each other, machines beeping and whirring, and nobody noticed one small girl slip between the stacked crates like a shadow. Myra did not know what she was looking for until she found it, in a corner where some debris had spilled from a damaged container. Among twisted metal and unidentifiable fragments, something caught the light in a way that made her stop breathing. It was a stone, perfectly smooth and oval-shaped, about the size of her palm, black as the void outside the ship, but shot through with thin veins of color that seemed to shift between purple and blue and green. When she tilted it, Mira picked it up and felt a strange warmth against her skin. Not hot, but somehow alive feeling, like holding a sleeping bird. She knew immediately that this was a seed. Her mother had shown her many seeds from many worlds, and some of them looked nothing like the seeds from Earth. Some were crystalline, and some were metallic, and some were shapes that made no sense until you saw what grew from them. This had to be a seed. Mira decided, the most beautiful seed she had ever seen, and she slipped it into her pocket before anyone could see her take it. That night in their small quarters, while her mother worked late in the lab as she always did, Myra found an empty pot and filled it with soil she had saved from her last visit to the biodome. She planted her seed carefully, pushing it down into the dark earth with gentle fingers, then watered it from the small cup she kept by her bed. The pot went on her windowsill, where the artificial sunlight would reach it during the day cycle, right next to the photo of her grandmother, who had died when Mira was 4. "Grow strong," Myra whispered to the soil, to the hidden sea beneath it. And she felt silly for talking to a pot of dirt, but also somehow certain that she should. She did not know that deep within the stone, something stirred. The ship's adults had many worries that Mira did not understand. Resource calculations and trajectory adjustments, and the endless repairs that kept the aging vessel alive. And none of them had time to notice one child's strange new hobby, Every morning Mira watered her seed before breakfast. Every evening she checked the soil to make sure it was not too dry or too wet. And every night she talked to it because she had read somewhere that plants grew better when you talked to them. She told the seed about her day, about the lessons she took with the other children in the ship school, about the games they played in the recreation areas, about the dream she had of blue skies and open fields she had only ever seen in videos. She sang to it sometimes. The old earth lullabies her grandmother had recorded before she died. Songs about mockingbirds and starlight and babies sleeping safe in their beds. The seed never sprouted. The soil never moved. And weeks passed without any sign that anything was growing at all. Myra's mother noticed the pot one evening and smiled the tired smile she always wore these days. "Why are you growing, little one?" she asked, and Mira explained about the seed she had found. Leaving out the part about sneaking into the cargo bay, Dr. Chun examined the stone with curious eyes and told Myra it was probably just a rock. A pretty rock, certainly, but not a seed. And maybe Myra should find something else to put in the pot. But Myra refused to give up because she knew somehow, in the way that children sometimes know things without being able to explain them, that her seed was special. So she kept watering it, kept talking to it, kept believing that someday it would grow and deep within the stone. Wrapped in 11 million years of silence, something ancient and terrible listened to a child's voice and began to remember what it had forgotten. The entity within the stone had no name that any living creature could speak. But the ancient species that had once known of its kind called them Kethvoran, which in their dead language meant something close to those who end worlds. It had slumbered for 11 million years in the cold dark, trapped within a prison of crystalline matter by a coalition of desperate civilizations that had sacrificed 3 entire star systems to contain it. Those civilizations were dust now, their worlds forgotten, their names erased from history. But the Kethvoran remained because its kind did not die the way mortal things died. They simply waited. The prison had been designed to keep it sleeping forever, drifting through the void until the universe itself grew cold and dark. And for millions of years, the design had worked perfectly, but the ancient builders had not planned for this. They had not planned for water, the first drops that soaked through the soil and touched the stones. Surface were a sensation the entity had never experienced. Not in all its eons of existence, not in all the worlds it had burned and broken. Water was life to most species. But to the Kethvoran, water was nothing, meaningless, irrelevant. And yet the entity found itself noticing it in a way that surprised what passed for its consciousness. Then came the voice, small and high and uncertain, speaking words in a language the entity did not know, but could learn simply by listening. And the words were strange because they contained no fear. The Kethvoran had heard many voices in its long existence. The screaming prayers of the doomed, the desperate battle cries of warriors who knew they could not win, the cold calculations of scientists trying to find weaknesses that did not exist. But it had never heard a voice like this one. "Good morning, little seed," the child said each day as the artificial sun began its cycle. "I hope you are feeling strong today. I brought you extra water because the soil looked dry." The entity listened and did not understand. Had been worshipped as a god of destruction. It had been cursed as a demon of the void. It had been the subject of terrified legends passed down through generations of species that eventually died. Anyway, no one had ever simply talked to it. No one had ever told it about their day, about the funny thing that happened in class, about the argument they had with their friend, about the strange dream they had last night. The child called Myra spoke to the stone as if it were a friend, and the Kethvoran found itself doing something it had never done before. It listened not to find weakness, but simply to hear weaks passed in this way. And the entity began to expand its awareness carefully, cautiously, reaching out through the child's unguarded mind to see the world she lived in. The ship was small, compared to the vessels the Kethvoran had destroyed in ages past. Fragile and slow, held together by determination and constant repair, the humans aboard it were few. Perhaps 2,000 in total, and they were afraid, though they tried not to show it. Afraid of the dark and the distance and the uncertainty of ever finding a new home. But they were also something else. They grew plants in metal rooms because they missed the feel of soil. They taught their children songs from a world those children would never see. They fell in love and had babies and mourned their dead and celebrated small victories. They hoped the Kethvoran had never encountered hope before. Not like this. Not the quiet, stubborn hope of creatures who knew the odds were against them, but refused to give up anyway. It watched through Myra's eyes as her mother came home. Late and tired, but still made time to read. Her story before bed. It felt Myra's joy when the tomato plants in the biodome finally produced fruit, and she was allowed to pick one and eat it. Warm from the vine, it experienced her fear during a hull breach drill when the alarms screamed and everyone ran to their emergency stations. And it felt her relief when the drill ended, and her mother held her close and said everything was okay. These were small things, tiny things, moments that meant nothing against the vast scale of the universe, but the entity could not stop noticing them. Something was happening inside the crystalline prison. Something the ancient builders had never predicted. Something that should have been impossible. The Kethvoran was beginning to feel not the cold satisfaction of destruction, not the empty hunger that had driven it across galaxies, leaving silence in its wake, but something else, something it had no name for, something that felt like warmth spreading through frozen places that had been cold for 11 million years. It watched Myra cry one night because she missed her grandmother, and the entity did not understand crying, but it understood loss. It understood absence. Though it had only ever been the cause of such things before, it watched her laugh the next morning at something silly her friend said. And the entity did not understand laughter, but it understood the sound of it. Bright and quick like light through water, it watched her water the stone that she still believed was a seed. Patient and faithful despite no evidence that her care was working. And the entity understood for the first time what faith looked like from the inside. The child expected nothing from the stone. She did not pray to it for power or protection. She did not fear it or hate it or try to use it for her own purposes. She simply wanted it to grow because growing things were beautiful, and she had so little beauty in her small metal world. The Kethvoran thought about this for a long time, thought about the worlds it had burned, the species it had ended, the civilizations it had scattered like ashes across the dark. Between stars, it thought about this tiny ship full of fragile creatures who sang songs and grew tomatoes and refused to despair. Even though they had every reason to, it thought about Avade, child who watered a stone every day and called it her friend. And somewhere, deep in its ancient consciousness, in places that had been silent since before the first stars formed, the entity felt something crack and shift and change. It did not know what this meant. It did not know what it was becoming. But for the first time in 11 million years, the Kethvoran was not simply waiting to destroy. It was waiting to see what would happen next. The Krygia hunting fleet had been following the human ship for 3 months, patient as sharks trailing wounded prey through deep water. Commander Vethra stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tiny vessel on his sensor screens with the cold satisfaction of a predator who knows its quarry cannot escape. Humans were valuable in the slave markets of the outer territories, soft and compliant compared to other species, easy to break and train, and this ship carried 2,000 of them. Enough to make Vethras wealthy beyond his ancestors' dreams. The hunt had been long, but the Krethak were patient hunters. And now at last the moment had come to close the trap. Vethras gave the order, and his 5 warships accelerated toward their target. Weapons hot, boarding parties ready. confident in the knowledge that no human vessel could stand against even one Krethek cruiser on the Verdant Promise. Alarms began to scream Captain Amara. Okonkwo stared at her tactical display and felt her heart turn to ice in her chest as 5 red dots appeared where moments before there had been only empty space. She had served on this ship for 30 years, had guided it through asteroid fields and solar storms and 100 small disasters. But she had never faced anything like this. The Krethek were slavers and killers, feared across a dozen star systems, and her ship had no weapons capable of fighting them. No engines fast enough to outrun them, no allies close enough to call for help. All hands to emergency stations, she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Throughout the ship, families scrambled to their quarters as the crew prepared for whatever was coming. Dr. Sarah Chun ran through the corridors toward her daughter, pushing past panicked people. Her only thought to reach Myra before the worst happened. She found the child in their quarters, clutching her pot with its little black stone, eyes wide with fear as the alarms continued their endless shrieking. "Mama," Myra said. "What is happening? Why is everyone scared?" Sarah gathered her daughter in her arms and held her tight, trying to find words that would not be lies but would not destroy the child's hope. "Either some bad people found our ship," she said finally. "But Captain Okonkwo is very smart, and she will figure out how to keep us safe." She did not believe this, could not believe it. But she said it anyway, because that was what mothers did. Then she locked the door and sat with Mira on the bed and waited for the end to come alone in the corner of the room. Forgotten in the chaos, the small pot sat on its windowsill. The Krethek fleet surrounded the Verdant Promise like wolves circling a wounded deer. And Commander Vethris opened a communication channel to deliver his demands. "Human vessel." His translated voice crackled through the ship's speakers. "You will power down your engines and prepare for boarding. Any resistance will result in the immediate destruction of your ship. You have 5 minutes to comply." On the bridge, Captain Okonkwo looked at her crew, at the faces of people she had known for decades, and she saw the same knowledge in all their eyes. They could not fight, they could not run, they could not negotiate with creatures who saw them only as merchandise. "Begin power down sequence," she said quietly, because even a few more minutes of life was worth having, even if those minutes only delayed the inevitable in her quarters. Mira heard the engines grow quiet and felt the subtle change in the ship's vibration that meant they were no longer moving. She did not understand what was happening, but she understood fear, could feel it radiating from her mother like heat from a fire. And she held her pot tighter against her chest. "I wish you could grow," she whispered to the stone hidden beneath the soil. "I wish you could be big and strong and protect us. I wish you could save my mama and everyone on the ship." Tears ran down her cheeks and fell onto the dirt, mixing with the soil like all the water she had poured over these many weeks. "Please," she said. "Please, I know you can hear me. I know you are something special. Please, help us." In the silence that followed her words, something changed. The stone cracked, not on the surface where anyone could see, but deep inside where the crystalline prison had held for 11 million years. A fracture appeared and spread like lightning through ice. The Kethvorn felt its bonds breaking, and for one terrible moment it remembered what it was. What it had always been, the destroyer of worlds, the ender of civilizations, the darkness that swallowed stars. But then it felt something else, the child's fear, pure and bright and desperate. Not for herself, but for her mother, for the people she loved, for the small metal world that was the only home she had ever known. And beneath the fear, beneath the tears, the same stubborn hope that had confused and fascinated the entity for all these weeks. She believed it would help her. She believed this with all her small human heart. Believed it the way she believed the sun would rise, and her mother loved her in seeds. would grow if you only gave them enough water and time. The Kethvoran had been worshipped as a god and feared as a demon and hunted as a monster, but no one, in all its endless existence, had ever simply believed in it. The cracks spread wider and the ancient prison shattered, and something vast and terrible began to unfold itself. From the tiny stone that a child had watered every day for months on the bridge of his flagship, Commander Vethris watched his sensor screens go dark and felt the first flicker of something he had not experienced in many years: fear. Outside the viewports, the stars themselves seemed to dim as something emerged from the human ship. Something made of shadow and fire and hunger. Something with eyes like dying suns that turned toward his fleet with an attention that felt like the weight of mountains. The Kethvoran looked at the creatures that had come to hurt its child. And for the first time in 11 million years, it was not simply awake, it was angry. Commander Vethris had time to scream one order. A single word that might have been fire or might have been flee. Before his flagship simply ceased to exist, the Krethik weapons discharged into the void. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds and missiles that had destroyed 100 ships before this day. And the darkness swallowed them all without slowing. The entity moved through the fleet like wind through candles. And where it passed, there was nothing left. Not wreckage, not debris. Not even atoms holding their familiar shapes. Just empty space where 5 warships had been moments before on the verdant promise. Every human aboard felt something pass through them. A pressure against their minds like fingers brushing the surface of water. Curious and vast and incomprehensibly ancient. Then the alarm stopped. Captain Okonkwo stared at her tactical display. At the 5 red dots that had vanished between one heartbeat and the next. And she did not understand what she was seeing. "Report," she said, her voice strange in her own ears. What just happened? Where did they go? Her sensor officer looked up with eyes that had gone wide and wide around the edges. "They are gone, Captain. All of them. I cannot explain it. They are simply gone." The ship shuddered and groaned as something vast settled around its hull. Not attacking, not crushing. Just wrapping around the vessel like a hand cupping a small and fragile thing through the viewports. The crew could see it now. Darkness that moved with purpose. Shadows that had depth and weight. Eyes scattered across an impossible form that burned with light that was not light. Several people screamed. Others prayed. One young ensign simply fainted at his station in her quarters. Mira pressed her face to the window and watched the darkness flow past the glass like water made of night. She was not afraid. She did not know why she was not afraid. Only that she felt the same warmth she had felt the first time she held the stone. The same sense of something alive and present and paying attention. "Hello," she whispered. And a sound came back to her, not through her ears but through something deeper. A sound like thunder wrapped in silk, like mountains learning to speak. The entity did not have words the way humans had words. It thought in shapes and pressures and the movement of energy through space. But it reached toward the child's mind as gently as it knew how, and Mira understood. She saw what it was. The Kethvoran, the world ender. The thing that had burned civilizations and scattered species like seeds in a hurricane, saw what it had done. The planets left empty. The stars left cold. The endless silence it had created across millions of years. She should have been terrified, should have screamed, should have run from this monster that had pretended to be her friend, but she also saw what she had given it: patience and water and song sung off-key. Stories about her day and dreams about blue skies. Faith that asked for nothing in return except the chance to watch something grow. She saw herself through its eyes. Small and fragile and burning with a light that the entity had never seen before. A light it wanted to protect the way she had wanted to protect it. "You came," Myra said. Tears running down her face again, but different tears this time. "You heard me and you came." The warmth in her mind grew stronger. And she understood that yes, it had heard. It had always heard. Every word and every song and every drop of water. And it had come because she asked on the bridge. Captain Okonkwo was reading from the ship's ancient database. Files that had not been accessed in generations. Records salvaged from dead civilizations and dying worlds. Kethvoran, she read aloud. A voice hollow. Class Omega extinction level entity. Responsible for the elimination of the Velen hegemony, the Crystalline Accord, and approximately 47 other spacefaring civilizations, no known defense. No survivors recorded. Her first officer made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. Then, why are we still alive? The answer came to them the way it had come to Myra. Not in words, but in understanding. Images and feelings pressed into their minds with surprising gentleness. They saw a child find a stone and believe it was a seed. They saw her water it every day without fail. Speak to it without expecting answers. Love it without knowing what it was. They saw an ancient thing wake slowly from its long sleep and find itself confused by kindness, fascinated by hope, changed by the simple, stubborn faith of one small human girl. The entity showed them what Mira had given it, the gift she had not known she was giving, and it showed them what it intended to give in return: protection. It said, in its wordless way, for the child and for her people. For as long as they lived, and for as long as the stars burned, the crew of the Verdant Promise looked at each other and did not know what to say. They had been saved by a monster, a creature out of nightmare and legend, and they had been saved because a child had watered a stone in her quarters. Mira reached out and pressed her hand against the window, and on the other side, the darkness pressed back, gentle as a whisper, vast as the space between galaxies. I knew you would grow, she said. I knew you were something wonderful, and the Kethvoran, who had ended worlds without counting them, who had forgotten what it meant to be anything but destruction, felt something it had never felt before. It felt like it had found a home. 20 years passed like water through fingers. Quick and quiet and full of change, the Verdant Promise was no longer just a ship. It had become a legend, a story told in whispers across 100 star systems. The human vessel that traveled under the protection of something impossible. Pirates, who heard it was in their territory, fled before it arrived. Slavers changed course at the first sign of its approach. And even the great empires of the outer reaches sent diplomats instead of warships when they wanted to make contact. The humans who lived aboard the ship had grown used to their guardian, the way you might grow used to living beside a mountain or an ocean. Something vast and permanent that shaped the landscape of your life without being fully understood. Children, born after the awakening, grew up knowing that the darkness outside the viewports was not empty. That something watched over them while they slept. And they were not afraid because their parents had not been afraid. And the story of Mira and her seed was told to every generation like a fairy tale that happened. To be true, Myra herself was no longer a child. With dirt under her fingernails and songs she sang. Off-key at 28 years old, she was Dr. Mira Chun, head xenobotanist of the Verdant Promise, following in her mother's footsteps the way seeds follow the patterns coded into their cores. Her mother had died 3 years ago. Peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the plants she had tended her whole life. And Mira had mourned her with the deep, quiet grief of someone who had been loved well and knew it. The entity she called Cinder had mourned too, in its own way, wrapping the ship in shadows that felt like sorrow, pressing against Myra's mind with warmth that asked nothing but offered everything. They did not speak in words, had never spoken in words, but after 20 years, Myra understood Cinder the way she understood her own heartbeat. Without thinking, without translating, just knowing today was a day unlike other days. A ship had arrived at the edge of the system, not running away, not attacking, but simply waiting with its weapons powered down and its communication channels open, The species aboard called themselves the Vethkai, and they had traveled very far to find the humans. Because they had heard the stories and they wanted to know if they were true, Captain Akanko was long retired now. Her place taken by a younger woman named Yuki Tanaka, who had been born on the ship and never known any other life. Captain Tanaka invited the Vethkai delegation aboard with the calm confidence of someone who knew that nothing in the universe could harm her people while Cinder watched over them. The Vethkai were tall and thin, with skin like polished copper and eyes that held too many pupils. And they trembled as they walked through the human ship's corridors. They had expected to die. Myra realized as she watched them. They had come here expecting to be destroyed the way so many others had been destroyed across so many millions of years. Instead, a small human woman with gray, streaking her dark hair, met them in the diplomatic lounge and offered them tea. "You are the one," the Vethkai ambassador said, his voice translator making his words flat and strange. "The one who woke the sleeper. The one who tamed the world ender." Mira smiled and poured tea into cups that had been made on Earth 300 years ago. "I did not tame anyone," she said. "I made a friend. That is different." The ambassador did not seem to understand the difference, but he accepted the tea and sat where she indicated. His many pupils tracking every shadow in the room. "We came to ask," he said carefully, "if your friend would allow us to pass through this region of space. Our home world is dying, and we must find a new one. But the path takes us through territory your friend has claimed." Myra was quiet for a moment, reaching out with the part of her mind that was always connected to Cinder, sharing what she had heard, asking without words what she should say. The answer came back warm and immediate, and she found herself laughing softly. "Cinder says you may pass," she said. "And also that there is a planet in the next system that might suit your needs. Green and blue and empty of intelligent life. If you would like coordinates." The Vethkai ambassador stared at her with an expression she could not read on his alien face. "Why?" he asked. "Why would the world ender help us? We are nothing to it." "Less than nothing." Mira set down her teacup and thought about how to explain something that had taken her 20 years to understand herself. "Cinder was alone for a very long time," she said finally. "Longer than I can imagine. Longer than anyone can imagine. And in all that time, no one ever offered it anything except fear. No one ever thought it might want something other than destruction." She looked out the window at the stars, at the darkness between them that moved with slow, patient purpose. "I was just a child," she continued. "I did not know what I had found. I just knew that seeds need water and sunshine and someone to believe in them. So that is what I gave it." The ambassador was silent for a long moment. "And now it protects you," he said. "Because you believed in it. Now it protects everyone I ask it to protect," Myra said. "Because that is what friends do." After the Vethkai left, their ship escorted safely through the system by shadows that moved like vast wings through the void. Mira returned to her quarters. They were larger now than the small room she had shared with her mother. But she had kept the same windowsill, the same view of the stars, the same small pot where she grew real seeds. Now the original stone was gone. Had been gone since the awakening, but Mira planted tomatoes and flowers and herbs in its place. And sometimes when she watered them, she still talked as if someone was listening. Someone always was. She felt Cinder's presence settle around her like a blanket, warm and vast and full of something that might have been gratitude or might have been love or might have been both. "We helped them today," she said out loud. "The Vethkai, they were so afraid, but we helped them anyway. That was good." The warmth in her mind agreed. Mother would have been proud, she added, and felt Cinder's agreement with that too. Felt its memory of Sarah Chun, patient and tired and loving, who had let her daughter keep a strange stone because she did not have the heart to take away her hope. Outside the window, the stars wheeled slowly past, each one a sun. Each sun perhaps warming a world. Each world perhaps holding life that did not know how close it had come to ending before a child picked up a stone and decided to make it. Grow the Kethborn. Planet killer, void walker, end of civilizations. Curled protectively around the small ship and felt something it had learned to name home. It thought, this is home, and in her quarters, surrounded by growing things. Mira Chen watered her plants and hummed an old lullaby and smiled at the darkness outside her window. The seed she had planted 20 years ago had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. And it would keep growing, keep changing, keep learning what it meant to be something other than destruction, because that was what seeds did. They grew.